Are you curious about what sets SmartSuite and Airtable apart? In many ways, these two tools are very similar. Airtable is the incumbent. They've been around for 10 years so far, whereas SmartSuite, new on the scene, just came out in 2022, but was secretly being developed for over 3 years. What's the difference between these different tools? Which one is right for you? Well, we are breaking all of that down in this video, so if that's of interest, stick around and let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Gareth. I'm the owner here at Gap Consulting, and we make it our mission to help you automate and organize as much as possible with no-code tools. No-code tools are incredibly powerful. They give you so much potential at your fingertips without needing to know how to code. You can get organized and automated in ways that we could never imagine before. Before jumping into our video here today, I want to welcome you to join me for my automation training. This training is going to teach you the fundamental building blocks of no-code automation, whether you're doing that in Airtable or SmartSuite or another tool entirely. The tips that I break down for you in this training are going to help you on your way to saving 10, 20 hours of your time every week with no-code tools. So if you're interested, grab that training at garethpronovost.com/webinar-registration. But without further ado, let's hop on into the heart of this video. We have to talk about the key fundamental differences between Airtable and SmartSuite. Now, full transparency, we have been working exclusively with Airtable for many years. And it wasn't until recently, in mid-2022, that SmartSuite got on our radar and we gave them a shot. And so far, I've got to say, we've been very impressed. So as a company, we have a lot more experience having worked with Airtable, but that being said, it's translated really nicely to working with SmartSuite, so we have a really good feel for both of these platforms. Now, the first area that I really want to focus on are the key differences in the software itself. So there are some fundamental differences between what you can do in Airtable and what you can do in SmartSuite, and they don't always cross over. Yes, there's a lot of crossover, but not everything. Some things are better with one of the tools or the other. So let's break down a few different ideas or a few different sections within the tool itself so that we can go step by step and figure out which one might be best for your particular use case. Now, the first area to talk about within the software capabilities has to do with linking. So how can we link from one thing to another inside of these two different tools? Well, it's actually a lot more different than you might think on first glance. So first, let's jump into our Airtable example here, where I have an inventory tracking database. So this database then is comprised of multiple tables. Now, the jargon's a little bit different for SmartSuite, but it's going to feel similar. We'll get to that in a minute. But when we go to link something in Airtable, we have to link one table to another table within the same base or database. So there's no way for me to connect anything that's outside of this database. Now, what I can do is create what's called a synced table in Airtable. And this is where we establish a parent and a child relationship with our tables. And so we can create, let's say you have a different data source in a totally different Airtable database. Well, you can create a synced table, and it basically creates a window that will now exist in whatever other database you want to share it in. So I could bring in a synced table here if I wanted to. And this is the only way that I'm able to then interact with data that lives in other databases external to the particular one that I'm building in. So if I want to build a linked relationship, here I have my purchase orders, they're linked to my manufacturers, they're linked to my products, but you'll notice that I'm linking to things that already exist in this database. So let's contrast that experience with what we have inside of SmartSuite. Here I am inside of my SmartSuite solution, and a little bit of jargon out of the way up front. Instead of calling this a base, in SmartSuite we call it a solution. And instead of calling these tables, instead we call those applications or apps inside of SmartSuite. So when I have this app here, I'm in my contacts app inside of my sales CRM solution. Well, if I want to connect that to anything, I don't necessarily have to have that app that I want to connect to in this solution. I can connect to an app that lives entirely separately from my sales CRM, and that's an incredible feature. So this is one of those places where I think the linking capabilities inside of SmartSuite outshine those linking capabilities in Airtable. I don't need to create that synced relationship. I can just instead build a linked relationship directly to any other app. So I can do that here by just looking up linked, And here, when I go to establish that linked connection, yes, I see the different apps in this particular solution. Here's my contacts, my opportunities, my sales resources, and my accounts. But you'll notice that these are the apps inside of my sales CRM solution, and I see all my other solutions here as well. So this is a huge benefit to SmartSuite, the fact that I don't need to create those synced tables in order to look at data. The other advantage to this is the fact that these other records don't count against my utility. So if you take a look at the billing on these different tools, I'm only allowed to have a certain number of records in each one of my databases or my solutions. And so the fact that I have to now sync a table with Airtable is going to chew up some of the capability of my record limitation. Whereas with SmartSuite, those records live in an entirely different solution, and they don't now count against my record utility for this solution. I can just connect right into that other application that lives in a totally different spot. So as far as linking records go, we get a lot more flexibility inside of SmartSuite, and it really helps us with that record count. Now, another area we need to talk about is permissions. So when we share access to our Airtable database, we have a couple of options. So here, if I'm sharing access to the database itself, I go up into the upper right corner and click share, and I can invite people with these various permissions. I can make them creators, which means that they can fully edit the base. I can make them editors, which means they can edit the data, but not the structure of the database. I can make them commenters, which can comment on records. And lastly, I can just give them read-only access. Now, I should point out that all three of these different options here, the first three, creator, editor, and commenter, well, these options will require that you start paying for that user. And it doesn't matter which level you assign them, you're going to pay the same amount depending on what plan you're on in that workspace. Read-only is a free option, so you can give read-only access and you won't incur charges for that person. But notice that when I share this, I'm sharing access to the full database. Now that's partially true. Airtable also has a nice feature that includes interfaces. So I can build an interface inside of Airtable, and I can build it really from anything, right? They have some amazing dashboards that we can get started with. Let's just plug into this one right here. And if I want to share access to this particular dashboard, this interface that I'm creating, well, I can do that without sharing access to the underlying data. So once I'm inside that interface, let's go ahead and publish it. Imagine that this was a fully fleshed out interface here. Well, once I'm good with that, I can bring other people in here as well, and now they can only edit the data inside of the interface. So I can give them a slim view of the underlying data structure, and I'm only sharing a little bit, only the stuff I want to share with them in that interface. Now note that they will still incur the same charge, so if I'm putting them on as an editor or as a commenter, I'm still going to get charged for that new user, but they won't have access to the underlying data. So let's contrast this then with how SmartSuite works with permissions. SmartSuite gets a lot more granular in terms of how you can share access to the database. So here I am in my solution, my sales CRM, and I can come on down to permissions here, and you'll notice that I can change how people have access. I can say everybody has access. That would be everybody who's in this workspace. I can also say, hey, you know what, just certain teams. So maybe marketing team, you guys can see this solution, but sales team, they can't. So this is a nice feature, but then I can also get way more advanced as well and just go member by member, bring people in and decide what kind of access I want to give them. And when we look at the different options here, you're going to see one that you did not find on Airtable, and that's the assignee. So assignees here can view and edit content that they have been assigned, but they can't create new stuff, and they can't view or edit any other content that hasn't been assigned to them. So this is actually a phenomenal user permission level that doesn't exist inside of Airtable. Now, to take this a step further inside of SmartSuite, we can go to the app level and alter the permissions at an app level. So maybe I want to share only 2 of the apps here with my whole team. Maybe I don't want my team to see the opportunities and the sales resources, and that information is private for management only, but I want them to be able to see accounts and contacts. Well, I can share access with them to the solution, drill into the permissions at the app level. Again, this is something we cannot do in Airtable, and I can override the solution permissions. So I can come in and say, hey, you get to see this, or you don't get to see this particular app. And so with this more granular permissions, we're getting a lot closer to essentially what I shared with Airtable's interfaces. SmartSuite doesn't quite have interfaces in the same way that Airtable does, although you can build some advanced dashboards and things of that nature. But this is where we get the level of permissions that we require in order to say, hey, you can see this or you can't see this. So there's a little bit of give and take on both sides here. I like Airtable's interfaces now that they've rolled out permissions for those, and I think that's a win for them in that column. However, I love the fact that I can, in SmartSuite, drill in at the app level and change permissions, and it's way more beneficial to have the additional user scenario that we call assignee. Remember, the person that can only see and edit the stuff that they've been assigned to. So that's definitely a win in the SmartSuite column. So this particular topic is really nuanced. Depending on your needs, one of these tools may be the better solution for you. Now we have to talk about automations. Automations are a big component to any no-code tool, and I'm pleased to say that both of these tools have a very amazing open API, and we can do a heck of a lot with no-code automation. Now you may default to using a tool like Zapier or Make, formerly known as Integromat. Well, I love both of those tools, and we use them a lot with all of our clients, but I have to say that both of these tools, Airtable and SmartSuite, both have some internal automation capabilities that allow us to build things that don't require us to go to third-party tools like Zapier. So let's go ahead and jump in and take a look at Airtable's automations. Here I am with a brand new automation, and I have a few different options for a trigger. All automations work the same. By the way, if you haven't already grabbed that free training I mentioned up front, check that link below. It's garethpronovost.com/webinar-registration. It's going to teach you all about automations. But when we establish a trigger here in Airtable, we've got a bunch of options. We can trigger based on a record matching conditions, or a form being submitted, or a record being created, etc. But where I get most excited is where we break into third-party tools. And you have to scroll down on the list, but you can actually trigger automations in Airtable based on something that happens in Google Calendar, or Google Forms, or Outlook email. So they have a nice list here. If you're a Google user or a Microsoft 365 user, you've got some options for some automation internally built there inside of your Airtable database. Now from there, we have the next step in an automation, which of course is the action. So let me go ahead and pick any random trigger here so that I can move on and look at action steps. Well, yes, we can send emails, we can create records, we can update records, and we can find records. Or you can run a script if you're on the Pro plan. But here's where we see an even longer list of third-party tools that we have direct integration with. Slack, Microsoft Teams, Gmail, the list goes on and on. So Airtable's done a really good job of putting together some direct integrations, those different software that it knows are most popularly connected with Airtable. You don't have to go to that third-party tool in order to get that set up. Now let's flip on into SmartSuite and take a look at how this compares. SmartSuite has internal automations as well, as I mentioned. We access them at the solution level, and you'll see some similar different triggers here. Record matching conditions, record updated or created, a form being submitted, and at a scheduled time. So some pretty good stuff there. Now what we don't yet see in those trigger options are some of those third-party integrations. So the G Suite trigger integration or the Microsoft 365, not yet available internally inside of SmartSuite. Now that being said, take a look at the actions. We do see that there are some third-party integrations, and some of them are things that Airtable does not offer. And of course, Airtable has some third-party integrations that SmartSuite does not offer. So here we are, we can create a record, we can send an email, but then if we look at the other options here, we can use Intercom, send text through Twilio, Slack, and Gmail, and Google Sheets. So some of these are familiar, and some are unique to SmartSuite. So again, this is another area where you might say, hey, I know I use Intercom a lot. Well, maybe then SmartSuite is a better option for you because of the fact that there's a direct integration included there in the software. Now that being said, both of these tools do have Zapier automations. However, SmartSuite does not have a Make integration just yet, where Airtable does. So if you're predominantly a Make, formerly Integromat user, then you'll very likely want to go with Airtable, whereas if you're a heavier Zapier user, you're going to love SmartSuite. And the reason I actually prefer SmartSuite's Zapier integration to Airtable's is because of the fact that it is an instant trigger, meaning if you update a record in SmartSuite, it will instantly trigger your automation to perform whatever it needs to perform in Zapier. Whereas in Airtable, it is a REST API, so it's going to take a little bit of time. It could take 5 minutes, it could take 15 minutes, depending on your Zapier plan. So your trigger is not as instantaneous, whereas SmartSuite, those automations fire like clockwork as soon as you make changes to your records. Now let's move into our fourth topic about software capabilities, and that really comes down to interfaces. So Airtable, as we already spoke to, has an interface capability. We quickly stood up this interface in Airtable that's showing us a couple of different summaries, maybe some graphing here and a pie chart. So this is one example of an interface in Airtable, of which there are many. It's a drag and drop interface, and we can allow people to get access based on the permissions. So we can limit the access to an interface and say you can only see things that belong to you, or you can only access certain records based on other conditions as well. So the interfaces in Airtable are actually pretty robust. They've gained a lot of traction over the last year, especially when recently in October, Airtable made an announcement that you could share just access to the interface, which we've already spoken about in this video. Now contrast that with SmartSuite's dashboards. So SmartSuite allows for us to get insights in our data, and in some ways the charts and graphs that we can build in SmartSuite inside of the dashboard functionality is actually a little bit better than the graphs that we can put together in Airtable. I'll give you an example here. We can add this target line on our graph, or we can color code things in slightly different ways. Also, when we click into this, we are looking at the relevant data in that particular graph. So the dashboard element inside of SmartSuite is actually a view. So inside of SmartSuite, when we go to build a dashboard, we are creating a specific view based on that dashboard capability. So once we add that dashboard, then we can add all kinds of charts and different widgets to it to make it really give us a full picture on whatever we're looking at. So the contrast there for Airtable is the fact that we have those interfaces which can then also kind of work as dashboards. So there are pros and cons here. There are things that Airtable interfaces do that SmartSuite dashboards don't. And there are things that SmartSuite dashboards do that Airtable interfaces don't. The big question really comes back to permissions, which we already spoke to. In SmartSuite, you're able to lock down permissions on an app level and say, hey, I don't want this team to see this, I want them to see this. Whereas Airtable, we don't have that level of permission inside of the database. However, for Airtable, we get that level of permission inside of the interface. So these two things are really playing off each other. The idea of interfaces in Airtable versus dashboards in SmartSuite and advanced permissions, well, it's kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other. Which way feels more comfortable to you, and how do you want to have your team look at the data? Well, that's what it's really going to come down to, however you answer that question. Now, the last piece in this topic that I want to talk to, it has to do with third-party tools. How do these different tools play with others? Well, Airtable interacts really nicely. It's been around a long time. They have an open API, and so there are a bunch of tools that already have integrations with it. We already mentioned Zapier and Make, but we also have things like Stacker and Softer and Pori.io. These are all third-party interface tools where we can build web apps and more advanced things that relate to the data that lives in our Airtable database. Unfortunately, SmartSuite is so new to the scene that they don't quite have those integrations built yet. Now, it's on their roadmap and those integrations are in progress, but as of this recording, if you insist on having a softer front end for your data, you wouldn't be able to build that back-end database inside of SmartSuite just yet. It's coming, it'll be here soon, but as of today, those third-party integrations definitely sway towards Airtable, and I really think this comes down to the fact that number one, they have bigger market penetration to date, and number two, which is leading number one, the fact that they've been around for 10 years as opposed to having just launched this year to the public. Now this takes us to an entirely different conversation, and that's the conversation around pricing. One of these tools might be better for you, but if you wind up spending an extra $5,000 a year, is it that much better? Well, let's find out. Inside of Airtable, their pricing is somewhat transparent and somewhat black box. So on the free, plus, and pro plans, we have clear indications of what we're getting and how much that's going to cost. So if we're looking at per month but paid annually, per user, Airtable is going to cost us $20 a month for that pro plan. So if we're paying monthly, that's a little bit more, I think $24 or so a month, but you know exactly what you're going to get here. 10 extensions per base. You get so many sync integrations, 50,000 records per base, 20 gigs of attachment, etc. Most of us fall in this particular column. The majority of our clients are on that Pro plan, but we're seeing more and more companies getting on that Enterprise plan. But this is where Airtable's pricing goes into a black box, and you have no idea what's going to come out on the other side. They tell you what the capabilities of Enterprise are, but the pricing is not listed. So you have to contact sales, and I've heard a mixed bag of emotions from different clients who have gone through this experience. Some of them have contacted sales wanting to get on Enterprise, but because their team is so small, the per user amount that they would wind up paying just doesn't even make sense for them to make the switch. So Airtable doesn't really have a clear way for a lot of folks to get into that middle ground. If you are a small company, cool, Pro plan is going to do all right for you. But if you're in that mid-range, Enterprise might not be right for you. It might be too costly, but you've outgrown Pro. So this is one area where I think Airtable has room to improve over time. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Now let's compare that to SmartSuite's pricing, which is incredibly transparent. There is no black box for Enterprise. They're very similar to Airtable in pricing. You're getting that $10 a month for the second tier right off of the free plan, right? And then we upgrade a step beyond that to a $25 a month plan. But where Airtable then says, hey, you enter the black box of Enterprise and we have no idea what the cost is going to be until you talk to sales, SmartSuite says, we know up front what that's going to be. It's $35 per user if you're paying annually, or $40 a month if you're paying month to month. And so we see that we have pretty similar things for what we're paying for. 50,000 records on that Pro plan, 200,000 records if we're upgraded to Enterprise. As I mentioned, SmartSuite doesn't require as many records, and that's because of the fact that we don't have to sync tables. And so within SmartSuite, you have these standalone apps, and so you can just go ahead and link to anything and you're all good to go. So for the most part, we've got an apples to apples comparison here. A lot of this stuff on pricing is the same, except for what I consider that mid-sized company where it comes in and says, I'm too big for the Pro plan, I want something more robust. Well, Airtable may not have the right thing for you in their Enterprise plan, but the fact that SmartSuite has transparent pricing, you know what it is, you're paying per user, it's just like the Pro plan with just a little more juice. That makes a lot of sense to me, and so I'm a fan of this pricing, even though per user they're slightly more expensive than Airtable on a user-by-user case. I think it mostly comes out in the wash. Now this takes me to our last point here, and that has to do with the communities around SmartSuite and Airtable. In the last few years, Airtable has gone through a couple of different rounds of bolstering their partnership program, and it's kind of in an unknown state right now in terms of what's going to come out of that. Contrast that with the fact that when SmartSuite launched, they went directly for a partners first approach, and they did so with gusto. They have created an amazing affiliate program so that partners can just sign up with new users, they onboard new folks, and they get a residual income from that. That's something that Airtable doesn't quite offer yet. Couple that with the fact that they really are taking this partner-first approach and they're bolstering that community and putting a lot of resources there to grow that community. They've also worked very hard on creating some content on the way to use SmartSuite and a certification program so that consultants can get ramped up in this space. And while you might not think that that directly impacts you as an end user, I would argue that it really does. A big push to support partners is going to help with your implementation at the end of the day. When you get stuck, if there are dozens and dozens of different partners to choose from with one of these tools, and the other tool doesn't quite have that same community built, well, I think you're going to have a better implementation with the tool that has a better partnership ecosystem. So I think this is just another place where SmartSuite really comes ahead of Airtable because they've dedicated those resources to that partnership program. And yes, it's still early days and a lot can happen, but the fact that they've made that a part of their go-to-market strategy as compared to an afterthought, which is what we kind of feel within the Airtable communities, well, I think that kind of speaks for itself. So listen, there's a lot to unpack here. Obviously, the choice between these two softwares is going to come down to your preference as an end user. So let me know in the comments which of these resonates the most with you. And of course, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay up on no-code news just like this, and I'll see you in the next video. As always, I hope you found that to be extremely helpful. If you did and you'd like to learn more, swing by our website and see how we can help. We offer a free Airtable crash course that will help you level up in Airtable quickly, and we also have some paid services, including hourly consultations with our experts. We have some online courses and a group coaching program, and for advanced needs, we can build a bespoke solution for you from scratch. So swing on by, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.